the true lessons of the recession. You'll get different opinions from different people. Joining us now from Texas, James K. Galbraith. Professor, good noon to you.
Good noon to you.
Robin Rajan was just on Out of Booth, Chicago. It's a different view than Galbraith. And the view is we're not confident the stimulus was well spent. Let me ask you the same question I asked Professor Krugman the other day. Is this about size of stimulus or effectiveness of how we spend stimulus?
I think it's mainly about size. It's somewhat about effectiveness, but it's also about other things that needed to have been done and that were not done, including comprehensive reform of the financial sector. So while I think the stimulus was a necessary step, there was an assumption that it was going to be the final step, and that you could have told from the beginning was not going to be the case.
Here's Rajan on the way towards Galbraith, and this is the Dodd-Frank quote out of his essay. There's a chart on the 10-year yield. Bring up the Rajan quote, if you would, please, William. This is from we're working on it right now. This is the Dodd-Frank essay. Is Dodd-Frank a constructive bill? There it is. Legislation such as Dodd-Frank, although much derided for the burdens it imposes, needs to be given a chance to do its job by channeling the private sector's energies away from excess risk-taking. I assume you agree with that. What part of Dodd-Frank do we need to put into place now?
Well, there are two elements of Dodd-Frank that I think are particularly important. One of them is the consumer protections. And there, it's not only going forward what the financial environment will be for the broad public, but also there needs to be a much fuller accounting of the practices that led to the debacle. And the second is the resolution authority. We don't know how that would work. We don't know that if it can be made to work. But until we come to a test of that in an appropriate case, then I think until that moment, that particular part of Dodd-Frank is simply an open book, an open question.
Professor Rajan worked within the nest, the snake pit known as the IMF. You worked in the snake pit known as the Joint Committee at Congress a number of years ago.
Yes.
Yes, but the Joint Economic Committee. But it's a little different Washington now. Can Washington affect the policies you would like now, or have you just given up hope until 2013?
Oh, for the moment, I'm not terribly hopeful, and I'm not sure I'm hopeful about 2013. I think the advantage the United States has in the world is that it has functioning governmental institutions. The large parts of the society are still basically working as intended. So we're not in the kind of deep crisis that Europe is in. But can we, in fact, make necessary improvements and reforms? There's obviously very little evidence of that.
Professor Galbraith, here's another Robin Rajan quote, again tilting towards Galbraith, and I thought a very balanced essay. Banks were profitable, safe and boring, and the price was paid by depositors who got the occasional toaster instead of market interest rates. What kind of banking system would you like to see?
I would like to see one where the institutions are smaller, where they are primarily concerned with underwriting and supporting businesses, and frankly, where we're back in an environment where we are under much closer and more effective control. That's what I'd like to see. Whether it is possible to go back in that direction in the modern world seems to me to be a very questionable proposition. I'm not at all confident of it.
It's your observation on Europe. This is getting serious, isn't it?
It's very serious, and I think there are no good options under discussion. If Greece stays in the Eurozone, it's being asked to do things that it cannot possibly do. The Greek society is already being destroyed by the cuts that are presently in place. University professors, for example, have had their pensions cut back to €1,100 a month. The school system, the hospital system, transport system, these are all going down. A country cannot repair its economy under those conditions. If it exits the euro, you've got another set of problems. Competitiveness will not be restored by a massive drachma devaluation, I don't think. You're talking about an economy whose industries, the first one is shipping, which is a worldwide industry. The second one is tourism. Depends upon economic conditions in the rest of Europe. You might get some marginal gains, but it's very unlikely to be the solution that people are sometimes claiming.
Professor, I see over your right shoulder the initials LBJ. I had the privilege of interviewing Robert Caro this week for his new volume on Lyndon Baines Johnson. President Johnson would have sat everybody down and made a decision after locking the doors, something J.P. Morgan did, I believe, in 1907. Let me ask you the same question I asked Professor Rajan. Which institution is going to be the grown-up in the room in Europe?
Well, I would hope that right now it would be the presidency of France. You have a new player and the capacity to interject a new line into the discussion. I don't think any of the international institutions are up to the job, frankly.
Professor Hollande flew to see Chancellor Merkel. Not much, I would suggest, came out of that. We sort of stagger headline by headline. When you see this play out in the effect of contagion, Ireland tried to do the right thing. Let's bring up the Ireland chart right now. This is Ireland to Germany spread, and you can see the Ireland of long ago and far away, 2007, and then up we go in panic, and Ireland's actually done pretty well. Do we need to see more Ireland, Professor Galbraith, out of the other peripheral countries?
Well, Ireland has been implementing austerity. It has not been recovering economically. And I think the difficulty that you have is that any one country can be as compliant as it likes, and they're still subject to a panic based upon what's happening in the Eurozone as a whole. So this is not a problem that can be solved by good behavior, whatever that means, on the part of Europe's peripheral countries. It has to be resolved by action at the center.
The action at the center and of the core periphery, do you agree with Professor DeGuar and Professor Rajan that we need to see a bond markdown, that finally the elites that own those bonds, those institutions, have to take some form of direct write-off?
Well, I think there actually has already been a significant write-off of the Greek debt. That's made possible by the fact that public institutions, as Professor Rajan said, now hold most of those debts. So this is something which was basically timed so that it would be survivable by the private banks. The difficulty here is that once you have started down that path, then you have other countries that would like to get the same deal. And then you get into a situation which may not be so easy for the banks to survive. So no, I don't think that simply writing down the debt, well, that may be a necessary step, is a sufficient fix to the European problem.